But Biko, when he was there, he met in the room when he entered. He then said, is even God here? Or even God is here? Kanti no Thixo ulapha. Now he was referring to Robert Sobukwe. So like how do you celebrate when a person died, when the people were brutally killed? It doesn't make sense to celebrate a youth day. Two, the economy was then seriously crippled up until the American companies and Chamber of Mines and other companies pumped in a lot of money to salvage the apartheid government. And people will say the K word. What is the K word? What nonsense is the K word?
Cafe.
No, you must say cafe.
Yeah.
It's not, there's no such a thing. It doesn't make sense to say, no, let's take now one settler, one bullet and go and shove it into a cupboard because you are afraid that you are going to be called into an equality court. It doesn't make sense because all of these elements of settlerism, of one settler, one bullet, and what does it mean?
Politically correct. We've got a visitor. He's got a very interesting name, and to me, it's a very interesting name because I'm a big fan of Malcolm Little, Malcolm X, Al-Shabaab. So he's gonna tell us a lot of things. I don't over-prepare for my podcast, as you are aware. So I'm just gonna let him speak, and then the questions will come from what he tells me. Mo-Africa dumela. Let's talk Mo-Africa. Please tell us your names, where you come from, and then you tell us your other names, so I can understand you.
You can get it.
Yes.
I think let's start there. In that issue of the name.
Okay.
In that, because I was you know. When you love something, love somebody, someone, you
yes.
always want their heritage to be maintained even beyond their existence,
yes.
even beyond their life.
Let me check if your logo is not blocked there. Let me check.
This one.
Yeah, I don't want it to be blocked. Yeah.
So I then decided in my WhatsApp profile,
yeah,
to put the name of Malcolm X, his name that he had accepted for himself, El Haj Malik Shabazz. So most people then would ask, why are you putting that name on your WhatsApp profile? Like it's it forces you to inquire, and it forces me to dispense knowledge in relation to that.
Brilliant.
And also at the same time, I'm a as you're talking about my logo,
yes,
I'm a director of my own creative company called Izwelethu.
All right, let me try to adjust. Yes,
I'm sorry for.
It's fine.
So I do those creative works, and my company is called Izwelethu. When you look at it again, if you look at this, it is written the Izwelethu, and what the Izwelethu what? And again, it provides us with that opportunity to then begin to unpack further. What do we mean when we say Izwelethu? And beyond this logo, there's an African continent logo. So it answers that question. Lefatshe la rona, ke eng lefatshe la rona? Ke Africa. So, but my official name is Thand'Olwethu Dlanga. And I was born in the Eastern Cape in a town called Komani. It used to be known as Queenstown, but my parents are in Qonce, used to be called King Williamstown. And I'm an Africanist.
Before you get there,
yeah,
I know you guys gonna hate me for interrupting him. I love having conversations. you, and I'm happy you spoke about Komani and explained its previous name. I just want to feel from a person who comes from those areas, how do you feel about that name change and what's the significance? But finish your trail of thought and then at the end put that.
No, okay, and I'm an academic activist, and I'm trained in philosophy, history, and political sciences. I'm an advocate of Africanism and Pan-Africanism, and I'm a Sobukweist. I love Sobukwe with all my heart. And I'm also a volunteer at the Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe Trust. I assist them as part of the administrative assistant work. And how do I feel about name changes?
Rafrinet, for example.
How do I feel about name changes? If it's before you even think about how do you feel about them, you must go and look at the act that governs those processes of name changes. And on the basis of that act alone, before you look at other things, I support those things because they provide a particular dignity to a people of a locality or of that society. For an example, you've got a town that was named Queenstown, but the Queen at the time never even lived in this country. But then because there was a disregard of a particular group of people who had occupied that part of the world. Now, because you disregard them because they look like me, they're Africans, you then impose a name that obliterates their history, their heritage. And when we get to this point where we then re-standardize, this is how we call it, we re-standardize the name, I accept that because the people of that area had a name for that place before the Europeans came to that place. So even with King Williamstown, it doesn't make sense that you can have a King Williamstown in an African country. So I always tell people when they say, no, that is Queenstown, I'm like, there's one Queenstown in the world. It's one. It's in New Zealand. There's no other one. Even New Zealand as a settler colony itself is at some point, the Maori people must begin to change that name of Queenstown in New Zealand. So I support those name changes. I've written pieces around the issues of name change, and I'm known that I had been part and parcel of people who were advocating for the renaming of Grafrenet to Robert Sobukwe. And I still say we should continue with that process. And majority of people in Grafrenet support that name change, despite the lies that you are picking up with the so-called research work that has been done by a particular group of people. And even in that research, they have excluded the majority of the Africans of Grafrenet and the other areas, and they handpicked some people for the benefit of their so-called legitimate research.
Profound. When I spoke to Ntate Mohlala, he says to me, Mashian, Rupert owns almost the entire Grafrenet. And I can't fathom like such a thing. Like I feel, today I was dealing with a case of a racist school in Middelburg.
Okay.
Yeah, so when he says so, like I can't make sense of it. That. I've never been to Grafrenet.
What kind of?
I mean, the whole entire thing, the whole town. I mean, the way he says it and the way I had, because at first it baffled me. So when I went further, he's not the only one who's making this allegation. So just paint it as for us, because technically speaking, anyone could just have a town.
Yeah.
If you've got money, you could just have your town.
That's the thing. That's the thing with them. You know, money is a good commodity. Yeah? But the problem with it, when it is used for a bad purpose, it becomes a problem. And then you would hear people who believe in the biblical scriptures say it is a root of all evil and all of those things. Maybe it emanates from that thinking. When somebody has got that power,
Yes.
then they would use money for those nefarious ends. It's true. You know, when you own, it might not be owning in the sense, but his economic power influences the majority of
The whole town.
The whole town. The thinking of the town economically is therefore influenced by him. And if I'm correct, he was born there, so he's from there. He's got a helipad as well in his farm. And also even the thinking around the people around there, it is influenced by mainly what he wants, especially the European descendants. They are influenced by Rupert. Now, even now, the businesses around that, they are influenced by Mr. Rupert. So when he talks about that owning, he's not the only one who has made that claim. There are others as well. And underneath that, there's racialism and racism. Those two elements. I know in South Africa, ever since the dawn of democracy, there's not been a lot of talk around racialism. It's always about racism.
And please break it down.
Racism has got everything to do with power. So you can, once you have power to racialize, you can then implement racism, yes, because you've got a power to racialize. So Europeans, when they came in part in the global south, in the areas like Africa and others, they needed money. They needed economic control. That's the primary reason for Europeans to come in the global south. Europeans do not hate black people because they are black. They only racialized them for the benefit of their economic strength. So once you racialize a person, you can then claim their inferiority. Now, once you claim their inferiority, then you can apply racism. So instead of seeing Mashiane as a human being, you are going to see Mashiane as a black person. So you are racializing Mashiane. Now, once you're done racializing Mashiane as a black person, then you inferiorize Mashiane in the blackness that he is. Once you're done doing that, then you can then say people like Mashiane must be excluded, must be placed on the side. They don't get the economic benefit. Their dignity must be cast away. The heritage and history must not be regarded. They therefore become non-humans per se, because you've started by giving them a particular category. It is the same as when you say abantu ngamakwere. You understand that, and you are categorizing that person. You are othering that person so that you can be able to then apply an oppressive approach to it. So there is this racialization and then racism as well. Now, if you look at the town in Graaff-Reinet, from my observation, the majority of places of work, they are occupied by Africans that are known as coloureds. Now, Africans that are accepted to be black, or that old derogatory name of Bantus, majority of them, they are not participating in the economic streams. And so that shows you the racialization of the people of African descent. You are Coloureds, and then these others are then Kafirs. But in the main, all of you in the broader scheme of things, they are all Kafirs. But you must then categorize those people. So that's my explanation around the issue of racialization and then racism, which racism has got everything to do with power dynamic. Now, if you've got a power over a particular group of people, you can then apply racism to them.
That evil guy called it policy of separate development, good neighboring, he says.
Yes.
So one of the tools to racialize people was this pencil test and stuff.
True.
So those are the tools of racializing.
Racializing,
so they can categorize them perfectly.
True.
So they can apply
that racism.
Okay.
And around the Xhosa speaking people, you would have abantu ababekuthiwa ngomthimkhulu. They are family names. They call them surnames. Umthimkhulu. But because there's that racialization that is taking place post the 1948 African national government, then some of people would then, as a way of trying to participate in this process, they then change their surnames to Grubwam. But it's still Mthimkhulu, but now in the racialization categories, they are at least above other so-called Bantus. They would then fall into the racialized category of Coloureds. Then they can get a job. Then they can be treated better than the other so-called Africans who are not regarded as Coloureds. Hence, sometimes I find it strange that here in South Africa there's this language now of people of color, women of color, or people of color. I'm like, what nonsense is that? People of color. What is that? So yeah.
So I remember in the past, and I'm glad you raised it. I remember in the past there was this attempt to say, you see, in the US where the term of color was used, those Africans used the same surnames as their oppressors. But of course, there will be names that you can see, especially a surname that you can especially a name, a first name. You can see this one is not white.
It's not white.
Yeah. So and then of course they lost their ability to pass as colored in South Africa. In the US they don't have. But then in South Africa in particular, the one I want to put on your table to opine on is this book wrote bomb, who April. You know these people who use their names. And it then ties us back to who Gayton McKenzie and Benny McCarthy.
Okay.
These people are as African as you and I are. Them using whiteness for political and administrative gain, even in post-apartheid South Africa, them doing it. Do you consider that as selling out?
No, you should look at this thing in two ways. One, when you know nothing else other than what you know, then why fix it if it's not broken? So because you know nothing else, somebody was brought into this world and understands the grandfather and the great-grandfather and the father and whomever, their parents, to be a particular family name. And therefore, when it comes to them, why would I have to change it if my forebears had accepted it? And therefore, on the basis of that, it becomes difficult to then make a sweeping statement to say they are selling out.
Sure.
But also on the other side, there are people who uses their proximity to whiteness to their own benefit, for their own selling out. But selling out is not something that is done by people who are close to a proxy or using a particular surname. Yeah. Sellouts are mere sellouts. They can be sellouts with the most African name ever. And there's nothing you can do about that. Mm-hmm. They they can come from a lineage of warriors, but then within that lineage of warriors, then you find a sellout. And there's nothing you can't link selloutism and the selloutness of a person to a particular surname.
Yeah.
But maybe sometimes it can be hereditary, I do not know.
Look, man, it's very tough being an African. So we have the 21st of March.
True.
There are a lot of people with Pan-Africanist persuasion who are very unhappy with how the ANC sold out when they were sitting on the table to reorganize our history and rename it, fearfully afraid of telling people what happened on the 21st of March, what happened on the 16th of December, what happened on the 16th of June, like all these special dates. It's a form of sell out, it's a form of cop out, it's a form of being there's a social media word, a good black. Yeah, to be a black that is not intimidating, a kind of black that white people will say, no, this is a good one. Let's empower this one.
You are not like the others.
Yeah, it's not aggressive, this one. So we can work with this one. So the ANC thrived on that. Please tell us what happened on the 21st of March. I don't know which year, but tell us what happened on the 21st of March. And according to you, what should this day be called?
Yeah, let me start at the end. It's always nice to start at the end, because when you start at the end, by the time you go to the beginning, people know what was the ending. The 21st of March is a commemoration day, and it remains Sharpeville Day. And I would, in my own limited mind, think that maintaining it as a Sharpeville Day holds and keep with it its essence, because it then provides you to dig a little bit deeper as to what transpired. But also at the same time, the other person who subscribes to the rainbow ideology, which is something that I would like us to talk about as well, the importance of ideology in all of these things, would then say, no, but that was historical and it happened in 1960. Post that, there was another historical moment that took place in Sharpeville, which is the signing of the 1996 South African Constitution, the one that is understood to be the best in the world. So there are those people who would say that and say, no, there was another historical moment. And it is for that reason that we then call it Human Rights Day. But for me, I don't think it catches and captures the essence of the day itself. I think it fails to capture the essence of that. It's the same as when you look at the June 16 being a Youth Day. Let's celebrate Youth Day. Like, how do you celebrate when a person died, when the people were brutally killed? It doesn't make sense to celebrate a Youth Day on a day with which the whole of the African community was mourning on those days, the day of the 16th, the 17th, and other days post that one. So for me, that's what I think around that. But just to get to what transpired, that day, Imashiyane, came as a result of a lot of things. Remember, Africans and people who are oppressed ordinarily, you can place them into a cage, but at some point they will, because it's a human spirit, they will want to get out of it. They will find a way to fight back. Now, then there was this issue of passbooks and passes. And those things were a definition or a characterization of inhumanity of the Africans. Because Africans, for them to be in town, in Pretoria, or any other place, they had to have these dompas. Now, by accident your house burns and your dompas is there. Because you are thinking tomorrow, I can't go to Wombas or Otani into my job or anywhere. I have to jump into that fire to go and salvage that mere nonsensical document that defines my humanity as an African in the country of my birth. Now, people lost their lives trying to salvage that. And also, their personhood, their humanity had to be determined by another person who puts a stamp that, no, between this time and this time you can come here, and after this time you are not welcome. So, Sobukwe's PAC then adopted a position of saying, we're going to look into a positive action campaign. And that was the umbrella body of their campaigns. We're going to have a positive action campaign, how to view ourselves as Africans in a positive light, and also unshackle ourselves from this yoke of African nationalism and apartheid and all of those things, and this colonial mentality and the imperial tendencies against us, seen as a third-class citizens and all of those things. And then he said, him and his group, we are then going to adopt an anti-PAC campaign. So you've got a positive action campaign, which is a bigger end goal. The positive action campaign is an end goal. But then there is a means to an end towards the bigger goal. Now the means to an end becomes the anti-PAC campaign. So Sobukwe says, we're going to have this anti-PAC campaign. After this one, we're going to have another one, another campaign. It might not be anti-PAC, it might be something else. But we will do all of these campaigns towards our status campaign up until we reach our objective, which is freedom in 1963. That was the thinking. So then he said, what is the one thing amongst the Africans that all of them hate? Women hated it because their husbands were being controlled by this thing. And men also hated it, and children. So everybody at the time felt like the passes were an embodiment of racial oppression. So Sobukwe was able to identify that, and then he said, let's target that one as our first point of departure. And then once we achieve this one, we'll get to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And that was a national program, by the way. I know a lot of people, and I also, when I grew up around the thinking that this thing only happened in Sharpeville. No, it didn't happen only in Sharpeville. Because we are in Pretoria, Mashiach, I need to speak about the Pretoria leg aspect of it because it's an important element. There was one group that was in Sharpeville, there was another group that was in Soweto, Orlando, there was another group that was in KwaZulu, there was another group that was in Pretoria, there was another group that was in Cape Town, that is now Cape Coast. So South Africa at the time had 4 provinces. It had 4 regions. They called them 4 regions. It was the Cape, it was the Transvaal, it was the Natal, it was the Free State. So when you talk national at that time, you are talking about these 4 regions. So when somebody talks about national, do not think of the 9 provinces and say, no, it was not in Mankweng, but it was in Pretoria. So if Mankweng belonged into a so-called independent state, therefore it was not part of the national per se. So the Pretoria leg was led by Ntate Ntlodibe. And they handed themselves over at Hercules police station. Majority of people don't know about that because there were no people who were killed there. But also there was not a lot of people in that leg. The biggest was the one that was in Sharpeville. And also what made it very significant was the fact that Sharpeville at the time was the center of economic activities in, they called it what, in the Vaal, I think, in the Vaal Triangle. So it produced, and it had a big impact on the GDP of the Afrikaner nationalist government. Now, the participation in that strike by the Sharpeville community meant that the factories, which had a greater impact economically in the GDP of the Afrikaner National Party, meant that we need to deal with this thing decisively. It's the same thinking that happened in the 2012 Marikana massacre. Because the economic interest of the Europeans was being contested. And therefore it is for that reason that they took all their Saracens, their guns and their power and the might towards Sharpeville, not towards Hercules, because Pretoria there was no greater impact. But if that is allowed to continue in Sharpeville, in the Vaal Triangle, it will shut down basically the large part of the economic sector of the Afrikaner government. And Sobukwe understood that dynamic of the superiority of whiteness being made by economy. And when he organized with his crew in Orlando, and Nyakane Tsulu and his brother on the other side in Sharpeville led that leg, and it was the biggest leg. And after some time, there was then this killing of these Africans, and most of them were shot at the back. And by the end of the day, there was approximately 100 people who were killed, and over 100 and something injured. But then because white people and the Europeans were in power, they determined the idea of what is knowledge production. They then recorded 65 as the people who were killed there in that massacre. But the PAC of Sobukwe had always contested that number and said, that's not true. There are more than 65 people. But the police report of the nationalist government at the time then took down the numbers, like they always do with other things. It is unfortunate that the current PAC, also in some of his posters I saw, they're talking about 65. But Sobukwe's PAC had always contested that. And then last year I met another professor and two professors. They were here launching a book, The Voices of Sharpeville. In that book, it outlines, it provides evidence of the numbers and the names of the actual people who were killed there. There were people who were pregnant. They were killed with their children in the belly. There were children who were injured and killed in that. And to a point that book dispels the entirety of the narrative that was brought in by them.
The name of the book again?
It's The Voices of Sharpeville. Voices of Sharpeville. It was released, I think, last year. And the fortunate thing about the book is that it allowed the people of Sharpeville to speak about the story of Sharpeville themselves. And it gives those voices. It does not rely on the archives of the apartheid government. So that's what transpired on that day. And these people sacrificed or were killed by the apartheid government, because the apartheid government understood that if we allow this thing to continue, these people are going to affect our economic strength, our economic power, which allows us to keep on racializing them and then applying racism on them. And Sobukwe understood get this dynamic, so he wanted to cut the throat of imperialism, deal with it decisively, finish and clear, because even the post-1990 governments, we call them liberal democracies, what keeps them stronger is the economic power. So if you cut that element, which makes them haughty and makes them imperialistic in their thinking, it's that money, it's that economy. So Sobukwe wanted to strangle that element. And it succeeded in two ways. One, post the day, which became Sharpeville Day, the passbooks were suspended, they were stopped, which was one of the things that Sobukwe and his comrades wanted to achieve. But also, two, the economy was then seriously crippled up until the American companies and Chamber of Mines and other companies pumped in a lot of money to salvage the apartheid government. And maybe you might not be surprised when then you find that up until late in the 90s, you would have the likes of Thand'Olwethu being referred to as terrorists by the United States government. And also, in the process of protecting the apartheid government in the US, they were funding the government, they were doing business with the South African companies and all of those things, while everybody else would say no to apartheid. They would say in public no to apartheid, but then behind the backs, they would then support that apartheid regime.
This is always a very difficult history of our people, chiefly because we know the truth. The truth is not comfortable to the powers that be. You see, the genius of Robert Sobukwe, I mean, is far beyond a lot of people.
True.
Because he said, well, if this is the single most polarizing document in our community, and the only thing that will make this document work is all of us.
All of us.
And I'm not disregarding the big march by women. All of us, let us stop using
it.
All of us, let us stop using it. Of course, we've got traitors amongst ourselves as Africans.
They were there even then.
And the biggest problem is whenever we have traitors and we want to call out traitors, some people would then label us, because traitors in majority and by all intents and purposes would have some sort of power in communities. So a traitor is a traitor. And had Robert Sobukwe succeeded with that, freedom would have come much earlier than it did. Let me give an example. You know, there are ANC people who still say Sharpeville Massacre is a day that Sobukwe killed people. And I'm being honest with you. That is the narrative that they are teaching people, to say Sharpeville was not supposed to happen.
That's a sad narrative.
It's a very sad one, and I've debated people, and I'm deliberately saying ANC, to say, guys, why would, when you are selling out, someone gives you a shortcut to the freedom that we all fighting for, why would you then call that brave person what they say, he killed people? I mean, they say the hands of those people are in Sobukwe's hands. And it's the most painful thing. Like, it's the most painful thing, I have to tell you. So I just want to understand this from you as a Sobukwe scholar. What was the participation of the African National Congress during that time? Of course, at the time they were not as free, but what was the participation of the ANC during that time?
Yeah. You see, this is what happens when you have a power, a domination over a people. You will then want to impose a particular thinking, in my thesis, in one of my dissertation that I wrote, I contest what is in some of the books around the issue of Sobukwe and causing the death of these people, and we can understand that because there was a competition. There was a competition between these two organizations, and it emanated from an ideological level, that's why I said I want us to talk about that at some point. It emanated from an ideological standpoint where there was that ideology would then determine how and what type of freedom are we looking for. And when they say that Sobukwe killed people or caused for the massacre of the African people, I don't think that's true, and that I think they are deliberately misrepresenting Sobukwe and Sobukwe's thought. Sobukwe was a staunch, non-violent, confrontationalist, radical person. This, what I'm saying, can sound like contradictory.
Yes.
But it is not. You can be confrontational without being violent. You can be radical without being violent. You can be pushy without being violent. So Sobukwe believed in non-violence. And the instructions that he gave towards that march, he kept on saying, we must maintain the highest level of discipline. Because once we have people who are going to start violence, it will then provide the enemy to eliminate you. And it will, beyond that, today we could be revolutionaries, that's what he says. We could be just some minor and small revolutionaries today because we've burnt down some buildings and we threw some stones at the police and then some people were killed and then we go and make nice speeches and radical speeches at the funeral. But a week later, this is Sobukwe saying, but a week later, our people and their minds and their emotions would have came down and they will then see and say, you have caused for us to be killed. So Sobukwe said, we should never make our people cannon fodder. We should not hide with our people. That's why he said, non-violence, he organized his Africanist task force group and said, make sure that you guard everything. If there is a person who is creating some havoc during this march, deal with him decisively, because we don't want violence in this process. What we're trying to do is we're cutting the throat of the economy, we're cutting the throat of the imperialist government. And in that way, we will win. So whoever comes up with that, I think it's more about the competition that was emanating between the Africanists of the PAC and the ANC people, whom we refer to as the charterists. And their participation was, they were invited into this. They made some claims around Sobukwe and said, he is hijacking an ANC program. Because the ANC had said at the time it is going to have a march, an anti-pass march on the 31st. And they claimed that through its Secretary General at the time, that the Sobukwe and his crew are adventurous. Whatever that they are trying to achieve is not going to succeed. You might remember that there was a repatriation of exiled people from the ANC and the PAC just now, I think last year. And one of those people who were repatriated is Utatu Tumanogwe, who was then Secretary General of the ANC at the time. He said, I quote, if Sobukwe and his crew succeed on that day with whichever that they want to do, I am going to swallow my own big head, close quote. And that was the senior leader of the ANC at the time. So you could see there was this particular competition between these two organizations that emanates from their ideological standpoint. So I mean to say there was no participation, even though everyone was invited to participate in that anti-pass campaign. But then later, when Dr. Lebohang Peku says, when the history has passed, we then saw Otatu Mandela and the others burning their passbooks. And Uti Usislebu, when she talks about it, she says, the history had passed them. The train had been gone. They had missed the opportunity to become part of history. And that's from my understanding, that was the participation of the ANC on that campaign. But not only the ANC was not participating, I want to clarify this. There was other people within the PAC who did not believe in the approach with which Sobukwe was saying. There was Tatu Uchosai Smatsonya. He didn't agree, and therefore he didn't participate. He's a senior cadre of the PAC. There were other also in KZN who did not participate within the PAC because they felt like it was not properly organized. So it's not only the ANC people who did not participate, the PAC also, but also it's not only the PAC members who were participating in this, it was the March for the African People. So I need us to contextualize and understand it within that paradigm. I don't want my fellow scholars to come and say, hey, you are making sweeping statements there that are not educated.
On ideology, I want you to give me a perspective on this. So the ideology of the PAC being pro-Africa, Izwelethu, Africa, stems from, according to the popular narrative, and I want you to confirm and deny it, from Kliptown 1955, where the People's Manifesto was read out to the people at the Congress of the People to say, here is a statement for all of us Africans. And so they said, Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. The land belongs to those who work it.
I see.
And the Africans lost it. Two questions. Is that the beginning of this rupture, or building up there has always been there? And while we are talking about it, who is the true author of that document?
This guy, putting me on the spot. Look, ideology or a philosophical framing is an important element of anything that you do. In your house, there is a particular ideology that is applied, and that ideology influences the kinds of decisions you make and the type of future you want to see. Not only for you, for your children, for the generation that comes beyond you. I know that post 1994, a lot of people begin to claim and say, no, the ideology, ITC, and all of that.
Now, of course.
the ideas.
Now, of course.
You understand?
Yes.
And I always say, ideology is an important element because everything that occurs in our society revolves around ideology, a philosophical framing. Apartheid was a particular ideology. It has a particular philosophical framing. The post-94 rainbow nation or rainbowism or whatever you call what we are living under, it stems from a particular liberal ideology. And that defines with which how decisions are made. That's why we've got one of the highest unemployment rates, because the ideology of capitalism and liberalism strives on poverty or on surplus labor, because you need to have a surplus labor so that you can have cheap labor. So it's a particular ideology. Imperialism is a particular ideology. Colonialism had a particular ideology. Therefore, ideology becomes an important element and that frames your thinking. If you are going to say, no, ideology is not ideology, sorry, ideology is not beneficial, I think that it's an incorrect way of framing how we think about things and ourselves. If the dichotomy between one group over the other, especially represented by Sobukwe's PAC and the ANC, at the time, it does not emanate from that period, from 55. There's always been a two-line struggle. This is what we call it. There's always been that two-line struggle within. And by the time you come into the 19th century, the African people had always understood things in a particular way. And then there were the arrival of the European settlers in the 1500s, 1400s, and then they're strengthening their settlerism in 1652, which then led to the 1700 settlers, 1720 settlers, who bring in a particular ideology of missionaries and. You then find that there are these groupings that are called Amaqaba, and this grouping that are called Amaqaboko, the converted and the non-converted. So within that, it was the beginning of showing that we do not agree with this ideology that has come with these ships and these people who came on ships. But then, Africans kept on fighting and fighting and fighting, but after many wars, they were then defeated, conquered. And the expression of that conquering was made into a law in 1909. In 1910, there was then establishment of a conquering polity, which was called South Africa. And even within that, there was then this group of so-called civilized people who wanted to be part of the conversation. Bring us in. We studied. We learned from your schools. We had become civilized. We can pray. We are Christians. We have even accepted the English names. So accept us into this table of yours. But then there was another grouping of people who kept on saying, we don't want that. We don't want that. So by the time we get into the 1940s, where you find the Congress Youth League of Anton Mzwakhe Lembede, Godfrey Piki, and A.P. Mda, and the others, they continuing from the ideas that have long existed. By the time you get Sobukwe pushing and his grouping the Africa for Africans narrative, that the Africa ikilifatse la rona, they are sitting on the shoulders of a particular grouping ideologically, while these ones who are saying South Africa belongs to all who live in it, also they are sitting on the shoulders of a particular ideological grouping. And by 1955, the Pope dance, the Africanist group within the ANC felt like by accepting South Africa belongs to all who live in it as the primary principle of a freedom charter, it then creates an impression that the Africans and the Europeans, the invaded and the invaders, the dispossessor and the dispossessed, the master and the slave can live together and accept the land that has been taken over by force and by treachery and by invasion is therefore for all of us. So that's when they begin to say, no, this is not acceptable. And that has culminated in a lot of things. Sharpeville, 1960, 1976, and so on and so forth. It is clear that from the archival material that it was impossible that a document, Mashiane, of that caliber could have been written by everybody. Inputs of everyone.
Yeah, that's what they tell us.
Inputs of everyone. People made inputs. I agree. It's historically factual that people made inputs. But the question remains, did those inputs of those people went there? I don't think that's possible. Let me make an example. There's a constitutional document that was accepted in 1996, the one we were talking about earlier.
Act 108.
People say that we wrote the Constitution. People didn't write the Constitution. People did not write the Constitution. A group of a particular people who were interested in a particular outcome, wrote the constitution, and then they wrote there in the constitution in the preamble, but we the people. And we were not, as the majority of people, consulted on the ins and outs of that constitution. So it's the same mentality when you look at it in the Clip Down Charter document. It could not have been. And we have had information that the people who were mostly of Jewish ancestry and they were European ancestry, Abo Bantu, Abo Joslovo, and the others who were coming strictly from the Communist Party of South Africa, they were the ones who were leading in that structuring and writing and presenting of that document. And it seems as if in Albert Luthuli's book, he claimed that he did not know where that document emanated from. So it was not something new when you saw the constitution being written by a group of people and then being presented as if it is a collective decision. It's also known that the former MK commander, Joslov, who is also of Jewish ancestry, he's a European. He is the one that proposed the sunset clause.
Of course.
Now, if you look at that, history has a tendency of repeating itself. But if you do not understand how history operates, you will then think that what the sunset clause was saying and how it was done, it was something new, when actually it was not something new. It was done before by people who've got a particular interest. And they themselves, being non-Africans, because Slovo was not an African, Benturok was not an African, and he will remain not an African. Even those who are saying themselves today of European ancestry that they are Africans, they will never be Africans. But he understood, but if we do not clarify this thing nicely and say South Africa belongs to all who live in it, we might suffer the repercussions as non-Europeans. So that's how I understand it in relation to that particular document. And it was a particular ideology that was influencing that writing of that document.
It is always very difficult whenever I want to think of the greatness of someone like. So in my podcast, I've got what I call icebreakers. At the beginning, I would throw questions of similar ilk people, and I would let them decide.
I see.
And of course, I would put Hani with Biko, I would put Patrice Lumumba and Sankara. The difficulty is always when I put the commercialized Nelson Mandela and Robert Sobukwe. And when I want you to understand, I would not choose Mandela over Sobukwe for various reasons.
I see.
Even though I do understand the sacrifices Mandela had to go through and. But it's a very divisive thing. And I would not ask you, because I mean, you're a scholar of Sobukwe. And what people don't understand when I'm Africa is, it's a decision. People sat here and said, guys, we need something for this campaign. Can we take Malema? No, Malema is very radical. That one, white people are not going to trust him. Should we take this one? And they had to do it and go and sell the entire campaign under a face of someone.
See.
And Mandela had to come up, and they had to sell Mandela all over the world. The Free Mandela campaigns and stuff. It was a deliberate ploy. He did not become the best of all the heroes that were there. It was just a decision to use him. Something that could not have been used. The reason I'm using Malema is deliberate. They could not have used someone like Robert Sobukwe because he's not palatable to Western thought. You understand? And the opportunity we miss is for the young ones, and even us. Please just take time to explain the politics of Robert Sobukwe. And I know it's difficult, but just take time to you do know that we do say Hani would not have allowed this. Biko died for this. You understand? So we would not know. You understand? We would not know what would Robert Sobukwe have done. But just tell us the politics of the man, his brilliant mind. That the reason we don't have his audio visuals available to teach our kids. Just explain it.
I see. One of the things that, as I said, if you want to cut power, you must eliminate its economic base. If you want to cut power. And Sobukwe clearly said it as early as the 1950s. He said, politics is not a matter of people's color, but it's about the material and the spiritual interest of the individual. Now, if you think about that political standing that says to you, I don't care whether you are white or black, but my material interest defines my politics, which makes me, myself, anything that I analyze, I use the historic materialist orientation. So Sobukwe used the same thing. He said, I don't care what politics, whether you can say, no, we don't want racism. That is a non-starter. The issue of politics of Sobukwe is that politics is about the interests, material interest of the individual and the spiritual interest of the individual. And an individual cannot be an individual human being without their material interest being catered for, and also their spiritual interest being catered for. For an example, in your house, you've got a small anyana for room. You can't even pass there. You don't have a space sufficient as an African to go and appease and speak to your ancestors. You can't do that because you don't have a material base for that. Also, you can't determine your own self future because you do not have the economic and material basis to do that. You have to take your bag and go to a particular place for you to go and seek for mereko. So your material interest rely on the other. Your determination is determined by the other. Sobukwe says, no, we need self-determination. And self-determination must be predicated on our material and our spiritual interest. And one of the material interests of the Africans is their land. Can you see how then? But not land for agriculture only, not land for occupation only, but also land for control, the air for breathing, the flora and the fauna, the water, the economy of the water, the economy of the air, the production that comes from the water, that comes from the land, that comes from the air. Everything, entirety of it, must be for the determination of us as an African. And you Europeans, you can make your self-determination home. Your land, your water, your sky, your air, whatever that is, it's yours. But this one, it's us for the Africans. So Sobukwe never reduced politics to the issue of race, black and white. Because, as I said, a sellout is a sellout whether it's black or white. A traitor is a traitor whether it's black or white, it doesn't matter. And on top of that, Sobukwe's politics revolved around Africans in Africa. he clearly stated that he does not believe, and when I say Sobukwe, I also want your viewers to understand, when I'm talking about Sobukwe and his comrades. He clearly believed that the nonsense of South Africa's exceptionalism is just nonsensical. You remember there was a point where a former President Zuma, when he was still a president, he was asked about the opening of is it Lilian Goyi? Is that this
street?
No, there's a freeway it's the M1, Albertina Sisulu freeway, the highway going to Joburg. And then he said, no, this is not like some road in was it in Uganda?
Yeah, he said in I think he said Uganda.
Yeah, it's not some road in Malawi. This is not some road in Malawi. And that thinking was clearly stating that South Africa is this exceptional locality or location as compared to the other African societies. And Sobukwe was anti that South Africa's exceptionalism. He said South Africa is an indivisible aspect of Africa. When you talk South Africa is not a different country to the African continent. It forms part of the African continent. Those were his politics, and therefore, by default, the person who is outside of the colonial borders of South Africa is no less of a human being than an African that is in South Africa. So his thinking always revolved around the strength of the unity of the Africans in eliminating white supremacy and its imperialism, and later what we are able to explain as neo-colonialism.
In terms of examples and trying to manufacture history, a Bikoist and a Sobukweist would think black consciousness, a pride of Pan-Africanism, would ignore economic exclusion of South African in a market where cheap labor is king. What do I mean by that? I mean, because of exposure of hunger and hardships, there is a certain rate per hour in my head and in your head that you would think, no, this is downright slavery.
True.
Because you and I are exposed to better things. We are seeing better things, and we know what this thing is worth. And this we can regard you and I as, this is substandard, this is inhuman, you are just making me a slave. But someone who is poor, African and outside of our borders might think, okay, they don't want it. Not to me.
It's sufficient.
It's sufficient. Do you see now that in our Pan-Africanism, we are people who sell out. When I debate African people, I tell them that when you come to South Africa, don't enslave yourself. But it doesn't make sense to them because they don't see it as slavery. Those people live in what you and I would call harsh conditions.
Abject poverty.
Yes, harsh conditions. Others are just happy to live in South Africa. They can work in farms and work in. I was in Komati Port yesterday, and I'm seeing Batsonga Bakaina across the board, the way they work, the way they are treated. And whenever I go around, I would see Zimbabweans subjecting themselves to this thing. And it pains me to say, I don't want them to do this because they are missing the whole thing for us. You understand? Because there are a lot of jobs that South Africans really cannot work. Is because of our, I don't want to say consciousness. It's very difficult to tell. And this is why I'm saying, what would a Bikoist, what would someone who follows Robert Sobukwe think of this? Because it's a very difficult thing to tell these guys, don't take a job like this. Because you are messing up our industry. We've got a minimum wage in South Africa. You guys just work. Even if they are just working for food, they do work. they need protection of living in these farms. And
Farms.
it's sad. It's very sad. But please, because it's separating South Africans as we speak.
One of the things I would like to talk quickly with the issue of Bantu, Biko. You know, in South Africa, there's this tendency of always stripping Biko and isolating him from Sobukwe. But he would then be made closer to the myth of Mandela. And there's always that thinking. But we know that Biko was influenced by his big brother. His big brother was Kaya Biko. Kaya Biko was a member of the PAC, and he brought PAC in Ginsberg. And Biko was influenced so much by the Sobukwe's Pan-Africanism to a point that he referred to him as a god.
Wait, Biko, Bantu Biko regarded Robert Sobukwe as a god.
As a god, yes. It's on record that in Kimberley, Biko jumped his banning orders and went to Kimberley. And it's recorded that when he came into the room and he said, Gandino Tikulapa. So it was the meeting with the Prof. But also, as I was doing my fieldwork last year in December.
I want you to say it again. I don't want people to pass through important historic moments. Say it again.
No, I'm saying...
Translate it if you need to.
Biko jumped his banning orders.
He disregarded his banning orders.
Like many others. There were many people. Yes. Even Sobukwe also at some point, he did jump his and disregarded those banning orders. He once visited Ginsberg as well. I'm going to talk about that just now. But Biko, when he was there, he met in the room when he entered. He then said, "Is even God here?" Or, "Even God is here." Kanti no Thixo ulapha. Now, he was referring to Robert Sobukwe. So he regarded him. I know a lot of people might think when you say Sobukwe as a god, but he regarded, it could be that he regarded him so high to a point that he would be saying, even a god is here. Now, Biko was influenced by Sobukwe. How was Biko influenced by Sobukwe? When I was at home last year, it was last year, I think, but I met some of the people who were telling me that Sobukwe had visited Ginsberg, but we're still trying to find the correct recording. He had visited Ginsberg and he met Steve Biko at Biko's home, not at Biko's house, Biko's home. These young people, the person who was sharing this story to me, he says, they were then asked to stand outside, to wait outside, because Biko, Brastiv was busy with an old man inside the house. So they waited up until Brastiv finished the conversation with this old man. Then the old man comfortably stood up, walked out, and then they walked in. When they then walked in, and they sat down, and Brastiv said to them, "By the way, do you know who's this old man who just left here?" They were like, "We don't care about. We don't care about that old man tonight. He was wearing a jacket and he was nice shoes. Just a very inconspicuous person who is not pompous about anything." And Brastiv said to them, "No, that is Robert Sobukwe." And they jumped. They were like, "The person whom we are singing about." I was like, "Yeah, he just stepped out." And then, because it was the disregard of the banning orders, he then made sure that they don't get up and. So that was the famous Robert Sobukwe. So Biko was influenced by Sobukwe a great deal. When Biko says liberals must go and organize amongst themselves. They must go and organize amongst white people. He says that around 68, 69. Ne? Sobukwe had said that in 61. Sobukwe had said clearly in 61, even not 61, man, sorry, in 59. He had said, we disregard, we don't want the leadership of white people, because leadership of liberals is that they tend to want to impose themselves on the Africans to take a leadership position, one. But two, Africans, because of the colonial experience, they tend to see white people and their liberalness as the custodian of leadership. So by default, if we allow white people to lead the struggle of African people will then succumb into their cocoon because they are made to feel inferior. So when Biko says it as well, to say, no, we don't want to be led by white people. Liberals must go and organize themselves amongst white people. It does not come from the sky. It does not come from his intelligence. Because the ideas that I'm sharing with you, don't come only from me, but they came from people before me. So they shape my ideas. When Biko establishes the philosophy and the ideology of black consciousness, he says, the problem of our country is apartheid. But to solve that problem, we need black consciousness. Then there will be this clash of black consciousness fighting with apartheid, that is now white supremacy. And once these merge together and it succeeds, there will be now a new way of living, because apartheid would have been destroyed, black consciousness would have succumbed. So both of them, they become together. They would then produce something called a humanity. So this is what Biko says. And he says these things in his essay, I think it was 1968 or 1969. He says that. Sobukwe earlier and his comrades, he says, our problem in South Africa is white domination. Earlier, Biko says white supremacy. And then Sobukwe earlier says the answer to white domination is African nationalism. Biko talks about black consciousness. Sobukwe had spoken about African nationalism. And Sobukwe then says, once these two clash, it's called a Hegelian thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It says, once these clash, white supremacy or white domination and African nationalism would have then merged and produced a new synthesis, which is now Africanism, a new humanity. Can you see that Sobukwe says this thing in the early 50s? Biko says it in the late 60s. But when you listen to the popular narrative, it will make this idea as if it was Biko's idea, when actually Biko was influenced by Sobukwe. So Biko and Sobukwe, and Biko has never separated himself from Sobukwe, to a point that even the children of Putunkusnati and the others, they are very much close to the Sobukwe family, because they know that their father was influenced by Utatu Sobukwe, and he regarded Utatu Sobukwe in very high regard.
I want you to hold it there. It's a very sad moment in our history when we want to recall our greats and compare them with what was happening then and compare them with what's happening now. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example. You know, Thomas Sankara was a big champion of empowering women, and he's got a track record of doing that way before a lot of people thought of it. And Mandela also has, but of course no one can compare with Sankara. Do you know what's the saddest thing today? When you read the history and you want to proudly communicate the greatness of Winnie Mandela, people will unfairly want to quote her female flaws, especially on sexual relations, Mampela Rampela would be suffering the same way because she had relations with Biko at the time that Biko was with Ntiki. And I want you to understand that I'm deliberately putting these things in front to say, here are great women who could have led better, but it is our African men who downplayed their struggle, credentials, because precisely they were female. And I'm saying precisely they were female because other political players who were as great as they were, who even did far worse things in terms of sexual relations, were not persecuted for that. And their legacy did not die because of that. Do you have anything? I know it wasn't fashionable at the time. The politics of then were very different. Do you have anything that you could base, you could just tell stories or anything, or what do you think was their thinking about empowering women?
It's a blind spot of that period.
Okay.
And it's a big blind spot, and we must always understand people within the prism of their time. And what makes Sankara better and he becomes advantageous is because he led in the 80s.
Yes.
But in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, the aspect of women were seen as an auxiliary. And that creates a problem. But it does not make these women less incapable. It does not make them non-founders of these organizations. Let me give you a straight, simple example. Everybody knows that the OAU was established in 1963 by a group of men. Do you know that there was an all-African women conference in 1962? That gave rise to the thinking of the OAU of the men in 1963. So the men who organized the conference of 1963 to establish the OAU took the cue from the women in 1962. The very same thing. But because the politics of the time were disregarded women in a particular sense, I mean, when I'm saying disregarded, it's because English is Bantu and Agna Lifuku that can capture what I'm thinking. But women were then placed as auxiliaries on the side.
Add-ons.
But they were as important as these so-called founding fathers because they became founding mothers. I always talk about Mamu Sobukwe. In the Azanian tradition, we call her the mother of Azania. Now, that mother, Sobukwe's greatness would have never manifested without Umam Sobukwe. Sobukwe's greatness, his capability, and his ability to even decide to resign from his lectural position at Wits University while there is a need for the feeding of the kids would have never happened without that capable mother. The Pan-Africanist Congress of Sobukwe, as was established in '59, would have never made sense or came to fruition had the women not supported them. All these ladies who were wives and who were participating in the backdrop of making sure that these men must achieve what they must achieve. It would have not made sense. Probably would have never known a better Sobukwe had Sobukwe not met Umamu Zondeni in that protest that they were in the 40s in Forte.
Hold it there. When Phumzile Mlambo Nyuka had an opportunity to emerge, Thabo Mbeki, that's what the history will tell you, selfishly said she's the best candidate that we have for to be president of the country.
Okay.
Selfishly. The reason I'm recording it as selfishly is because how? Ungamalala wants to ascend to being the president. This one finds it convenient to say a female needs to be president.
That's the nature of politics.
Exactly. I hope you get my drift. There was a time where Winnie Mandela's political campaign, well, she was beaten politically because she was already assassinated. Her character was already assassinated. And even though the masses on the ground, especially females, wanted her to become, even the young comrades, it was very difficult for her to come because those who control power and patronage, they didn't want her to emerge. It was very difficult for her. And she's not, and this is the thing, she's not as the other men were, because she's a female. It wasn't common at the time. Even now, I'm thinking about political parties as we speak.
This is the problem of our politics now.
When I was with Ntsika, I told her, this is why I think not in our lifetime. We'll be very glad. And that female who needs to come will come out as a compromise candidate from somewhere if people are clashing, say, let's have this one. For a political party like Sarah to bring Colleen Makubele to stand, she speaks women issues. Women in South Africa say, oh no, I'm a woman, and those, what she says is the thing that I want. Women, let's vote for this one. I don't see that ever happening. Does Pan-Africanism, does your Bikoist and your Sobukwist kind of politics, can they accommodate such a candidate? In the modern time, of course.
Yes and no. Remember, I'm saying, as I said, ideology defines the way you decide. And once you get a particular understanding of your ideology, it gives you a better ground of making decisions. I said, in the case of racism, politics is not about the race and color in Sobukwe's ideology. It is about the material and the spiritual interest of the individual. Now already, if you move from that premise, it didn't say the material and spiritual interest of the man or the material interest of the woman. It says of the individual, irrespective of their gender, no sexual orientation. However, misogyny within these organizations and these ideologies is used to perpetuate exclusion of others, especially women. So it has got nothing to do with ideology. It has everything to do with misogynistic characteristics of those who are in these organizations. This is happening across the board. So Pan-Africanism, in its sense, if you were to talk about Nkrumah, we went into a conference in Ghana. We were discussing the issue of Nkrumah in one book. When we were discussing this issue of Nkrumah in this book, we were able to outline that the gender element and the women element in the book, as great Nkrumah as was in his theoretical framing, but there were no women. And we, as people who follow that Pan-African, we identified that this is the problem. However, there is a failure of ensuring that the misogyny, the closing out of women in the space should not continue to happen. However, as a man, I am not a spokesperson for women because I would not want to be seen as to say, no, women must be brought to the center, as if women cannot bring themselves to the center. So it is an important element with which men in these Pan-Africanist organizations must be able to reflect on themselves
Yes.
and understand their biases, and not want to say, no, we must bring women in. You don't have to bring women in. It's not your business to bring women in. You by doing that, you are actually patronizing women again because you want to bring them in. Don't bring them in.
They should organically
Women
emerge.
are able to do their own emergence anyway, but create a conducive environment.
Sure.
But as things stand, most organizations do not create that conducive environment. It's a bad omen, or it's a bad reflection on Pan-Africanism and also Pan-Africanist organization.
Ke nyaka hore re tswalele.
Sure.
Before I let you go, kiss the boer, kiss the farmer are lyrics of a song that had potential consequences for the singer, and he wanted to kiss this boer and he wanted to hug this farmer.
I see.
But before that, the Pan-Africanist identified that our struggle, because the way Malema frames it, and I have to do it for the audiences, you are not going to have a lot of time.
Okay.
So the reason I'm doing this is for people to understand his framing. And he went to court twice. And all the time he says, the word Boer is a protest, and I'm lacking a good English word. People are talking about similes and stuff and metaphors and stuff, but of framing the system. The Boer is the system. You see, ke mmusho wa maburu. So this government, this system was called a Boer. So when they were saying kiss it and what, they were saying in essence, destroy this system. And that's how Malema puts it. And there's a way that the settlers was put, and as colonizers as well. Many kids may not know of one settler, one bullet. Please explain it.
It's a very, very nice dynamic. I've written a few pieces around these points that you are raising, and it's very interesting. For your viewers, one, let me categorically state it. The kiss the Boer, kiss the farmer, or hug the farmer, I think it was made for the purposes of political correctness. And so we can accept it at that level, but it's just a political correctness narrative to get out of the court process.
Because, he didn't want to be stopped from doing it.
Yes, from doing it.
But then, of course, in FNB, while he was rising,
yes,
he chanted it.
You understand?
Kill the Boer, kill the farmer.
So these are some of the things. And two, there is a shying away of history and heritage in this country. For instance, people will say the K word. What is the K word? What nonsense is the K word?
Cafe.
No, you must say kafir.
Yes.
It's not. There's no such a thing. It doesn't make, because it makes it hollow.
Yes.
To say kafir, I mean the K word. But when you say kafir, it has got a particular meaning.
It lands where it's supposed to land.
Where it's supposed to go. And we Africans, even now, despite us wanting to run away from calling the word kafir, we live is kafir in South Africa as African people. We are dehumanized. We are the worst. You understand? So, from my perspective, I don't believe in that one settler, one bullet is a hate speech. I do not believe in that. And I've made some intellectual submissions on this. And I've even criticized or made a critique against the PAC leadership currently around that issue of saying, no, one settler, one bullet is our heritage, and we used to do it in the past and in the camps. I'm like, that's nonsense. One settler, one bullet remains relevant to this day, because settlerism itself, number one,
Still exists.
still exists. Two, the issue of one settler, one bullet is you do not accept it as if it is as modern as APLA, which came to exist in 1968. It is not as modern as that. That thinking is as old as the chants that were being said by African warriors, whether they were Zulu-speaking warriors, they were Xhosa-speaking warriors, the Khoi warriors, the Igbo warriors, and the Mau warriors, and whoever. It comes from a particular tradition that seeks to explain a particular phenomena of a particular time. And on the basis of that, when somebody says one settler, one bullet is a critique of settlerism, it explains a particular phenomena of a particular time. You can't therefore say, no, let's take now one settler, one bullet and go and shove it into a cupboard because you are afraid that you are going to be called into an equality court. It doesn't make sense because all of these elements of settlerism, of one settler, one bullet, and what does it mean? They exist to this day, but the counter-argument is that it promotes violence. Like, we are a society that is built on violence. South Africa was established on violence. Violence of Europeans discarding the Africans and establishing the Union of South Africa, and built that building that is seemed to be today so much promoted, the Union's building here in Pretoria. So South Africa emanates from that culture. It does not mean that when you stop saying one settler, one bullet, or kill the poor, kill the farm, you have then stopped the element, the culture of violence of South Africa. It doesn't make sense. So those things of one settler, one bullet, in my thinking, they communicate a particular heritage. They communicate a particular reality as well. They communicate also a particular envisaged future. A future that says, eliminate settlerism. And if you can eliminate settlerism with one bullet, it's okay. Because there's nothing wrong to hate, by the way. Philosophically speaking, there's nothing wrong to hate. Because if there's everything wrong with hate, it means there's everything wrong with love. If there's everything wrong with hate, it means there's everything wrong with crying. If there's everything wrong with hate, it means there's everything wrong with laughing. Because all of these, they are natural emotions of individuals and human beings.
So they're gonna say the same thing they said about Malema and want to unscientifically link certain forms of violence with what you just said. Mm-hmm. So I'm asking, have the Human Rights Commission ever approached you on this matter?
Not me. They've never. And I've also made a critique. I think things will change now that the permanent commissioner in Gauteng of the Human Rights Commission is Professor Tsepo Madlingos. He's some kind of an open intellectual, and I think maybe some of these conversations can be had with him. But I know for sure that last year or a year before that, the PAC was threatened or was brought to the South African Human Rights or reported, and there was some kind of litigation that was taking place. Yeah, I don't know what happened to it, but how they defended that, I thought it was stupid the way that they defended it, and I also thought that it was nonsensical how they were defending it, because they were actually backtracking on that reality. But also it might be because maybe they were foreseeing the government of national unity in 2024. But all I can say is that the understanding of some of the things that you do when they are framed from an ideological perspective, it becomes difficult for you to backtrack. You can always change the corners and maybe the approach towards, you take a longer route, but the ideological framing remains remains the same. So Human Rights Commission have never approached me, and but I've always stated it very categorical. Even the human in the South African human rights represents more or leans more to the non-African, which is the Europeans, the European settlers, because of their economic power, because their influence, because we as Africans were racialized as inferior, and therefore when we contest the violence that has been imposed on the Africans, we then have to be dealt with. That's why we ended up having the 21st March of 1960. That's why we even tomorrow, us in the Africanist tradition and in the Azanian tradition, we keep on saying we must never forget Sobukwe, we must never forget the 21 March, we must never forget Sharpeville Day, we must never forget Dlanga Day, and we must always commemorate these milestones that were achieved by Sobukwe and his crew and all these other African and Africanist leaders of the past and those of today.
Quick questions, they need quick answers.
Sure.
Let's see how many we can squeeze.
Okay.
Do you think the name Union Buildings must be changed?
No, I don't think so. It is a representation of the oppression of our people, despite the fact that South Africa has embraced the post-1994, South Africa has embraced that, and it has shoved down the implication of that. I don't think it must be changed, because it reminds us of the violence of the Europeans on the bodies of the Africans.
Are you disappointed that PAC joined Government of National Unity?
I tend to try and avoid, but I am. I tend to try and avoid that. However, they've got their own reasons which they justify them, and the justification is never making sense. But nonetheless, it seems as if ever since the PAC joined the government of so-called national unity, they have become so mum on issues. For an example, if the PAC was a Sobukwe's PAC, Trump, they would have said something against the Trump claims. They would have said some things around the issue of the issue of in increments and the issues of VAT. Like they would side more with the Africans, but they've got their own reasons which they justify. But to me, they don't make sense. Perhaps to them they do make sense.
All political parties, all major political parties that represent African people were about the land in the majority, and by extension, our freedom was the land. And in your ideology, you spoke about that. Are you disappointed that they forgot about the land to an extent that even today as we speak, the PAC minister, who's the, well, maybe custodian of the land policies and land redistribution, is failing to convince an African king to share the land with other with Africans? I'm sorry, I wanted a short question, but I needed too late, so it's not confused, especially by our audience.
I see.
Yeah.
You see, this is the problem with a system. If you know a system, when it is structurally built, when you come in and you want to swim like in a dam, you think that, no, I can drink all this water in a dam all by myself. It just doesn't make sense. You will constantly fail. Instead, you are going to drown, and you are going to end up dying in that swimming pool, because the system, the way that the swimming pool is made, it has got a particular system that aligns to it. Now, it would be. There are two ways, or there are two reasons that might be. I don't know the story around the convincing or the non-convincing, but I want to tell you now, there is no way that the land redistribution element in South Africa, in the current context, would succeed, because the principles with which the land debate is engaged in are problematic. Two, the foundations with which the land redistribution and land conversation and land laws are placed. They are placed in a way that cuts off any potential of land redistribution. And three, if you listen to the people who talk about the land question in Parliament, they will tell you land redistribution, but take the policy. But when you look at it, it does not talk about land redistribution, by the way. It talks about land restitution. One of the books that I can recommend to your viewers is South Africa's First Frontier. It's written by Professor Kilingwe Mayende. It provides a better understanding of the problems of the land question in South Africa, in post-apartheid South Africa, but also it has got a historical element. So it's impossible that you would think with the current Section 25 as it is, and then you want to come in and think that you can resolve the land question. Even the economic freedom fighters' commendable push around the issue of expropriation of land without compensation, it will never succeed, because the foundation of land expropriation in South Africa must pass, first, the test of Parliament, secondly, the test of the Constitution, which means the constitutional must. Now, the Constitution of this country is premised on the protection of the European invaders, the dispossessed. Now, you can pass it in Parliament, but trust me, it will not surpass the constitutional must. So the minister or any other minister, whether the minister comes from a pink party or black party or beautiful party or ugly party, as long as the Section 25 of the Constitution and the other clauses of the Constitution remains, you are not going to have a land redistribution. And when on the 5th of December, Nelson Mandela Foundation submitted papers in court, Western Cape, to force the Minister of Land, which means now the Minister of Land, for land redistribution. So they were saying they are forcing the ministry to redistribute land. But when you look at the litigation itself, you can see this is just a mere nonsense of political expedience. And also, the minister also went around and said, no, we're not going to contest it. I think he had not read the papers before, or whatever the case might be, I don't know. But if you look precisely on the actual work that is being done, South Africa does not want to deal with land redistribution. It wants to deal, and it continues to deal with land restitution. Now, land restitution is not land redistribution.
Africa.
Yes, sir.
We can't stop speaking.
Of course.
Let's promise each other that this will not be the first.
No.
We directed it for so long, and it's very difficult to let you stop speaking.
No, because
when a beautiful mind speaks, it's very difficult to cut it.
No, next time.
Africa, sorry for making this a very long one. I can't even give him a chance to say goodbye, but let me try. Please say your goodbyes.
No.
Close it for me.
Thank you very much, Mashiane, and your viewers. Make sure that you guys continue to commemorate 21st March. Tomorrow is a day of commemoration. It's not a party day. Remember Sobukwe, and on the 28th of March in 2025, we will be going down to Graafrenet to celebrate the centennial year again of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. If you can, make it 10. If you can't, check us on SABC. Probably the Freedom Park and Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe Trust would be celebrating the life of this legend, including his wife, Veronica Sobukwe. Thank you, my brother.
Africa, thank you very much. I'm not going to say much.